The stunning spectacle of nature, strange, beautiful, and enormously destructive. In the 1980s, the Earth seemed almost to rebel, showing its fierce strength with a brutality unlike anything in recent memory. Earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, raging fires, and deadly cold. The sheer force and variety of nature's calamities rocked all corners of the globe as people drowned, froze to death, suffocated in rivers of mud, and were buried alive under mountains of rubble. Children were orphaned, whole families rendered homeless refugees. The common thread, the constant fury of nature, an unceasing assault that tested man's courage and his will to survive. This is the story of the planet Earth's terrible capacity for destruction, a story of overwhelming human tragedy, but also a story of survival, of heroism, and the triumph of the human spirit in the face of chaos. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story, Nature's Fury, a decade of disasters. From ABC News, great TV news stories with Peter Jennings, Hugh Downs, Tom Jarrell, Frank Reynolds, Max Robinson, and the worldwide resources of ABC News.
A survivor said the buildings moved like waves of the sea. Southern Italy. Now, what the government calls a state of natural calamity. Good evening. The parish priest in the little village of Balvano said it was like the apocalypse. It's a miracle anybody escaped alive. But there was no miracle for the more than 1,000 people now counted among the dead in southern Italy after last night's earthquake. For the latest on the tragedy, we go to Naples and Peter Jennings. Peter?
Frank, here in the port city of Naples, for the second night in a row, thousands of people will sleep in the streets. They're still afraid. It's a little more than 24 hours since their lives were plunged into panic and chaos. A series of shocks were felt from the northern Alps to Sicily, across the Adriatic to Yugoslavia and Bulgaria. But it is within 200 miles of this city where it was the worst. Thousands of people have been injured. The death toll continues to climb. Here's ABC's Bill Blakemore.
Peaks and hilltops often get the greatest vibrations in an earthquake. And this morning in the Apennine Mountains, beautiful under any other circumstances, the remote hilltop towns showed the greatest destruction. In the first light, we found the survivors of the ancient town of Sant'Angelo dei Lombardi wandering up and down what they now saw was left of their main street, trying to express their grief, trying to comprehend how many of their own community were gone. 2,500 lived in the town center. The sole surviving priest of the town told us that about 1,000 seemed to him to be missing. He spent the night assisting the dying, administering last rites. Striking just after 7:30 last night, the earthquake caught many families around the dinner table. The mayor of this town was last seen going into a club meeting in one of the ancient stone buildings, which was turned into a solid pile of rubble in what survivors described to us as the first rapid vertical upheavals of the earthquake. Before rescue teams were able to reach the high villages, townspeople turned piazzas into first aid stations for survivors they'd pulled from the jumbles of concrete, stone, and splintered wood. In other earthquakes, survivors have been pulled from wreckage after 2 and even 3 weeks. And as the Italian army and police rescue teams set to work, the search for life began to produce results. In this town, 13-month-old Anna Forte was plucked from deep inside a collapsed apartment building by a young rescue team. She was dazed but unscratched after 24 hours in the dark. A joyful uncle took over, hoping to make sure the girl was reunited with her mother, who'd been rescued from the same building shortly before. About 100 people are believed to have been caught in this newly built 5-story hospital when it collapsed. A doctor's voice is heard deep inside, saying others alive are trapped with him. But reaching him in the shifting rubble seems, for the moment, impossible. The terrible wait for many here is just beginning. It will be a matter of several days at least before the search for the living and the dead is finally over. Bill Blakemore, ABC News, in southern Italy.
Destruction on such a scale sometimes seems impossible to comprehend, but it consists of thousands of smaller incidents. Here in Naples, for example, they dug towards the voice of a woman for 18 hours. Her voice got progressively weaker and finally faded away before they could find her. For others, well, a tremor may last only seconds, but as Greg Dobbs reports, it leaves an indelible mark.
Almost all who died here died in church. It was evening mass. 1 out of every 5 villagers was here. They were Balvano's most devout, as most people were home watching soccer on television. When the first tremors struck, the churchgoers tried to get out the huge wooden doors in back, but they crowded in too close. The doors wouldn't open, and that's how it was when the stone wall fell on them. Over 60 have been found dead, half, as the surviving priest calls them, babies. Up to 100 more are missing, presumably still in the ruins of the church of Santa Maria Assunta. Rescuers say today, as they pulled some villagers out, they knew they were crushing others. Those who got out alone say they don't know how they did it. It was pitch black. The air was solid with dust. The screaming seemed loud as thunder. The church tower clock stopped at the moment of disaster. The priest, beginning to sing Sanctus, 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 Holy, 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 said he suddenly felt the altar rising. He literally scooped 4 altar boys up in his arms and saved them. It was, he said today, like a boat on a rough sea. It was like that throughout the Apennine Mountains. Greg Dobbs, ABC News in Balvano, Italy.
3 days after the catastrophe here, SOS messages are still being received from villages high in the mountains. As Greg Dobbs reports, sometimes the rescuers are able to respond.
Lisa! Luisa! Somewhere down there is a woman named Lisa. Her cries were heard by rescuers as they were digging out bodies this morning from the ruins of Livonia.
Attendo io. Attento. La mano.
Stick by stick, stone by stone, they dug to save her. Move the wrong stone, though, and their own precarious position could collapse, burying them, as well as Lisa down below. This rescue worker cut up his face, but he said, "I touched Lisa's hand, I touched her hand. My blood doesn't matter." And soon, they could touch Lisa's face. 64 hours she had been buried in the dark, in the dust. Her older sister, dead, on top of her. All of Lisa's family is dead now, but she, today, has been saved.
Hey! Oh!
Laviano, though, cannot be saved. One man told me today, Laviano doesn't exist anymore. 1,500 lived here Sunday. When the survivors gathered together after the disaster, they counted only 300. Still, for them, and for the rescue workers from elsewhere in Italy, there is a lot of gruesome work to do. Most of those presumed dead, after 3 days, have yet to be removed from the rubble. The smell of death here has yet to go away. As corpses are dug out, and as quickly as they are removed, more are discovered, they are carried to what was Laviano's public square. If possible, they are identified, then sealed away as they die. For Laviano's survivors, there is only a past here now, no future. In all these remote, devastated southern Italian villages, there's no money to rebuild, no body even to comfort the survivors, as all who are left are suffering equally. The village is destroyed. Most people are dead. Greg Dobbs, ABC News, Laviano, Italy.
Good evening. When the temperature goes below zero in Alabama and Georgia, it's cold. But old weather records have been falling as fast as the thermometer in the last 24 hours in almost all sections of the country. 36 of the 50 states had below zero readings last night. So what the nation is enduring right now is clearly one of the worst cold waves of this century. Tonight, a full report. First, here is Ron Miller in Chicago.
Buffalo, New York is paralyzed tonight by a blizzard that has already dumped almost 26 inches of snow. The forecast calls for more. People are stranded throughout the city, at bus depots, emergency shelters, and at the airport, where some 300 people running out of food will wait until runways can be reopened later tonight. Winds are gusting up to 75 miles an hour in the region, and some suburban communities are permitting only emergency vehicles on the roads. Nationwide, at least 40 people have died in this, the coldest weather of the 20th century. Frozen bodies have been found in several communities. Chicago was among the cities to reach all-time record lows. 26 below zero temperature readings in Chicago caused a wind chill of minus 81 degrees. Of all the emergency workers called into service, firemen are suffering the most, fighting both fires often sparked by faulty heaters and the bitter cold and frostbite.
The cold is not just something that kind of goes through you, but it hurts. There's pain.
At least 100,000 people in 10 states have gone without power because of the cold and storms, contributing to the weather state of emergency declarations ordered in countless communities. It may be days before livestockmen can assess their losses, but cattle and hogs are suffering in fields and barns throughout the Midwest. Substantial livestock losses would affect retail prices. Thousands of miles of highways remain closed tonight, travel impossible because of blowing and drifting snow. But the measure of this cold wave, what will be remembered, is the massive human suffering, unprecedented in this century. Ron Miller, ABC News, Chicago.
Freezing temperatures also blasted Europe today. For a time, it was actually warmer at the South Pole than in parts of northern England and Scotland. John Mackenzie reports from London.
Most country roads today were still blocked with hundreds of abandoned cars and snowdrifts 12 feet high in places.
I was stuck here and Ken. Before, there's a chap down the road there from Stroud, just down the bottom there.
Any message for the watch?
Oh, I'll just have a love it. I'll be home as soon as I can.
The only sure way of moving around was by helicopter. Many have been working around the clock, lifting out accident victims and hauling in food. Here it was bread in the southwest of England. The loaves had to be rationed, one to a family, and even then there wasn't enough to go around. Nor is there enough milk. British farmers have had to pour thousands of gallons of milk down the drain because tankers can't get through the snow to collect it. The sheer weight of the snow has snapped power lines, leaving at least 5,000 homes without electricity in sub-zero temperatures. People here are enduring the best they can, but some cannot. This weather has now claimed at least 14 deaths since it began on Friday. The conditions are expected to continue through the week and are affecting not only Britain, but other parts of Europe. In the northeast of France, Arctic conditions turned roads into sheets of ice, while unusually heavy snow hit parts of Belgium, Austria, and West Germany, making this a winter nightmare for many Europeans. John Mackenzie, ABC News, London.
The spring of '82 continued its vicious punch across the nation today, with snow and ice knocking out electric power and causing traffic tie-ups in the Great Lakes states. The temperamental spring weather has been marked by avalanches, tornadoes, floods, and now forest fires. Joe Benton has a wrap-up report.
For the third night in a row, a 10 p.m. curfew was in effect in a 5-mile wide path through the middle of Paris, Texas. A tornado destroyed 750 houses and killed 10 people in the small Texas community. In El Viso, California, near San Jose, 1,600 people were forced from their homes. Broken levees, heavy runoff, and high tides threatened to flood many houses with as much as 2 feet of water. And fierce winds swept across the middle Atlantic states, knocking out power and spreading fire. The high winds spread fires raging out of control across almost 9,000 acres of North Carolina forest land. In all, firefighters in North Carolina are trying to put out 11 major forest fires and 90 smaller blazes. Across the country, the Weather Service has counted 86 tornadoes. 46 people are known dead and hundreds injured. The Weather Service describes it all as a multi-talented storm that has done all it could to the country before it left. Joe Benton, ABC News, Washington.
Entire neighborhoods were washed away, and a stone bridge that had survived an atomic blast in World War II was destroyed by floodwaters that hit southern Japan today. Jim Laurie reports.
Japanese authorities mobilized several thousand self-defense force soldiers to help dig out southern Japan after the worst floods here in 25 years. Some residents were lucky. Rescuers got to them in time as torrential rains triggered massive landslides, burying them in mud. Many others were not so lucky. At least 120 people have now been counted among the dead. More than 300 are missing, feared buried under mud and debris. The fatalities have been taken to makeshift funeral homes where friends and families have gathered. Hardest hit was Nagasaki, where rising waters flooded more than 10,000 homes. The rains which struck after a 40-day drought came down at a rate of 4 inches an hour. Most people were caught in their homes at night with no warning. Overall, Japan's southern island of Kyushu is paralyzed, and the rain is still falling. Jim Laurie, ABC News, in Tokyo.
Good evening. There's news tonight of a terrible human calamity on the Indian subcontinent. On Saturday, a great cyclone struck the coast of Bangladesh, and it's thought now to have killed tens of thousands of people. Nobody knows for sure. ABC's Mike Lee spent today touring the islands off the Bay of Bengal, where life and property, everything, is gone with the wind and the water.
Most of the dead farmers, fishermen, and their families have been swept out to sea and out of sight, leaving the rice paddies of southern Bangladesh looking like a massive mud puddle. Entire herds of drowned cattle lay amid barely visible bamboo and timber. Those are splinters of family houses which have been crushed by the tidal wave and flushed like seaweed over miles and miles of flat, unprotected lowland. Bangladesh President General Hussein Mohammed Ershad took ABC News on a personal tour of one of the hardest hit areas, Char Purbashk. We could see scores of bodies, each lying alone, sometimes miles from nowhere. They had been carried long distances by the wall of water which hit just after sundown on Friday, sweeping inland, then pulling entire communities back toward the sea. President Ershad accompanied one of the relief helicopters into Purbashk, where several hundred survivors told him of the horror of that sudden wall of water at night.
How many were killed? It's very difficult to say. Many of them, they floated down to the Sandip, another island there. So, and you saw many dead bodies lying even now.
So there could be thousands dead from this village?
Maybe, possible.
Some of the elder survivors told us that there were about 10,000 people in this area, and that all but 400 were unaccounted for. It's not hard to see why. Most of the rice paddy huts here have been torn from their foundations. Pottery and a shoe here and there, the only traces of farmers and their families who may never be found. Government sources tonight tell ABC News that 60 to 70% of all houses in these southern regions of Bangladesh have been destroyed, and that over 1 million people have been displaced. The actual number of missing is not yet known. This teenage girl is among the victims who have been found, and without ceremony, buried in the mud. For President Ershad, taking care of the living means finding homes for children, like this baby boy, who didn't want a drink of water or a biscuit from the president. He wanted his mother and father. They are missing. It also means airlifting food and medical supplies to cope with an expected epidemic of cholera. And it means relocating survivors, like this woman who told us, "I've lost my husband, my 2 daughters, and 1 son. The only one left is my babu, my baby."
These empty bowls, more than anything else, tell the story of what this particular community is up against. Only a couple of days ago, these would have been full. This land that they farm would have been full of crops. Now there's no hope for a crop. The only food they have are the supplies we brought in on our helicopter, and that will probably not last more than a couple of days.
There is grief here, but it is overshadowed by the aggressive instinct to stay alive.
It's a terrible shock. These people are poor people. Some of the surviving here lost everything, and we have to help them to rehabilitate. And as a matter, I appeal to the whole world to help.
But it was this little boy, clinging along with his brother to a few possessions on what used to be the foundation of his family home, who said it all. Where is my mother? Where will I go?
Southern California is sweltering in a record heat wave. The heat and high winds are spreading dangerous brush fires all across the southern part. Here's ABC's Andrea Naverson.
The largest fire continued to burn out of control here in the desert mountains near Palm Springs. It is among a half dozen blazes that have blackened more than 40,000 acres of Southern California brushland. In the hills northwest of Los Angeles, air tankers drop chemical retardants trying to help firefighters on the ground. But they have been hampered by high winds and hot temperatures topping 100 degrees in some parts, and flames have been fed by brush overgrown because of recent wet summers. So officials fear this is just the start of a long and sizzling season in Southern California. Andrea Naverson, ABC News, Los Angeles.
When they start calling in firemen from east of the Mississippi, you know it is a very bad year in the west. In the last 11 days, there have been 45 major fires in 10 western states. Tonight, there were 23 major fires still out of control. More than 500,000 acres have been destroyed in less than 2 weeks. California has the worst problem, and the worst fire tonight is right on the edge of San Luis Obispo. Here's ABC's Gary Shepard.
It has been burning out of control for a week, scorching more than 55,000 acres of brush and timberland on the outskirts of San Luis Obispo, 200 miles north of Los Angeles. Then, late yesterday, there was a dramatic change, and as a result, this coastal city of 35,000 people wound up right in the path of the advancing flames. What happened was that late last night, the wind shifted. It had been blowing in the other direction. Now it's coming this way toward San Luis Obispo, and the entire city is now threatened by this massive fire. Today, neighborhoods along the northeast edge of the city came within a matter of a few feet of being consumed by the rapidly moving flames, fanned by winds of 25 to 30 miles an hour. But an army of 1,500 firefighters managed to halt the advancing wall of fire.
It was probably moving 30 or 40 miles an hour. We had spot fires, and then the whole thing just took off.
Thousands of residents were ordered to evacuate their homes early this morning, but some refused to go, choosing instead to stand and fight.
Well, I would say that the flames right across the street here were going like 150 feet in the air when they'd hit these bushes and trees that were up there, and in some cases higher, and it was hot.
The city took on the look of a war zone today. An army of helicopters made repeated water drops on the most dangerous flare-ups, while scores of fire trucks from dozens of surrounding cities were mobilized in the high school parking lot. Even though 7 homes have been destroyed, firefighters have managed to save hundreds of others. Their great fear now is that if the hot weather continues as forecast and the winds pick up, they might not be so lucky tomorrow. Gary Shepard, ABC News, San Luis Obispo, California.
Tonight, ABC News correspondent Ken Kashiwahara joins 2020 with the story of Charles and Gretchen Fletcher. They live in Ojai, California. It's about an hour north of Los Angeles. And their home was in the fire's path.
It is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The Ojai Valley is filled with smoke. Temperatures are in the hundreds. The fire has already engulfed 50,000 acres of trees and brush and homes. The blaze is still burning 10 miles away from the eastern valley edge of Ojai, but it is moving rapidly and unpredictably, fanned by high winds and fueled by tinder-dry brush.
Put that around there.
The Fletcher family, Charles and Gretchen, is warned by the fire department.
It's coming in now quite a bit more rapidly than we expected.
So the Fletchers know the fire is coming. Within 10 hours, they are told. Already they can see and smell the smoke, but there are no plans to evacuate yet.
I built this place and I'd like to keep it. I love this place.
So you're going to wait till the last minute, as it were?
That's correct.
Still, there are precautions to be taken now. Members of the household who can't fend for themselves are moved to safety. Flammables and equipment are moved out too, and firefighters begin to take up positions in the Fletcher neighborhood. It is now 3:40. Down the road from the Fletchers, 89-year-old Constance Wash and her daughter Patricia Eaton brace for the same fire, a fire that is moving much more rapidly than they thought it would.
Too close for any kind of real comfort, unless if the wind changes. That's really dangerous.
We're going to move our strike team in right now. We're going to move them in. We're going to move our resources in now. We're going to set them up. We're going to be more active, a little quicker than we thought.
But the firefighting strike team doesn't show up, moved instead to fight a new fire across the valley. For now, Patricia Eaton, her mother, and the neighborhood are left unprotected.
This is the kind of thing, it's like cancer and heart attacks and automobile accidents happens to somebody else. It may not do any good, but it makes me feel as if I'm doing something. You pump a great deal of adrenaline when something like this is going on, so I find myself just doing anything to be doing something.
4:30, the winds have picked up and the fire burns even closer. Yet an anxious Patricia Eaton begins preparing dinner. Members of the Ojai City Council drop by with another warning.
You're going to have another bad night.
At 6 o'clock, Patricia Eaton goes back outside for another look at a sky now blackened with smoke and thick with ash.
I don't like the wind. That is too close.
What are you going to do now?
I think I'll just keep on watching and hoping for the best. All right,
6:30, neighbors insist and she and her mother finally agree to leave for dinner in the safety of a friend's home, preparing in case the fire prevents their return.
Book, and I'm off.
We are approaching the time of greatest danger now because of what the people around here call the sundowner effect. When the sun goes down, the wind shifts, blowing the fires out of the canyons and toward these homes. Throughout the afternoon, the Fletchers have been watching the fire too. Now the sundowner winds are blowing the fire dangerously close to their home.
Look at the smoke.
Well, the smoke's moving that way, and that's in our favor.
The fire is now only 4 miles away, burning so rapidly because the brush hasn't been cleared since the last fire in 1948. Just over the ridge from the Fletchers' home, a bulldozer cuts a last-minute fire break. The fire engines return to protect the Fletchers and their neighbors.
Fear isn't what I'm feeling.
What is it?
Well, my mind is going at about, 60 miles an hour. How do you outfox the fire? What am I going to have to do? What do I do to stay ahead of it?
What are you feeling right now?
Sadness and yet hurt, scared, uncertainty.
What do you do?
Wait.
Pray. That's awful close to coming over the top.
Barbara Seawright, the Fletchers' house guest, decides to leave. The fire is now too close.
We'll meet you down there. Okay.
Take care.
Good. The flames are very, very close, and that bothers me.
6:45. It is even hotter now. 110 degrees, no humidity.
I'm scared, and yet I have a deep feeling that everything will be okay.
The winds have shifted. The fire is only a half-mile away and moving down the canyon.
How often do you cross your fingers?
Not very often. I don't know. I don't try it very much. This is one time I think I'll try anything I can.
Suddenly, there is no water. The Fletchers believe the water main has been damaged.
The dozer may have hit it because the main comes down across the back, and then we're a 2-inch line that comes off of that.
More pumper trucks with water arrive.
Good luck to you.
Other homes are being threatened too. This fireman's wife and children have just been evacuated and he leaves to check on them.
That bad down there? It's real smoky. Okay.
But the wind shifts again. For the moment the fire burns away from the house, Barbara decides to return. 7 o'clock. Once again, the sundowner winds are whipping flames toward the Fletchers.
I've never seen the flames this close.
Earlier, about 4 hours ago, we were talking and your plan was to stay here. What do you say now that the flames are so near?
My opinion is I'm going to stay,
Even with the flames so near?
even with the flames.
By 7:15, there is no question. The fire will consume the Fletchers' home unless firefighters act now. They decide to fight the fire with fire.
Bump him in there, Patrick. Get down to the ground through that stuff.
Hand crews clear a perimeter around the house, removing any brush that will burn so they can set a backfire, a risky tactic of last resort. What would happen if you didn't do it?
Well, then the fire is liable to run downhill at the house, and if it does that, then it'll torch all these big trees off, and then you have trouble with the house.
8:30, fire crews light the backfire, but timing is critical. It must be lit precisely when the original fire gets so close to the house that its force creates a vacuum, sucking the backfire and the heat away from the structure.
Look at this. Oh my God. That is scary.
If it works, the two fires meet and burn themselves out. If it doesn't, the backfire could burn back on the house.
It's really awesome, that's all. That is just unbelievable. You know, when they say they're going to set backfires, you just don't have any idea what it's like.
.45, the backfire has become an inferno, and the Fletchers worry about sparks flying into the house, afraid the intense heat may burn through the window frames.
Black glass is hot, yeah.
Boy, my heart is just pounding. I just want to stay out there.
It's a power that's uncontrollable. You know, you just can't really do anything about it. And that's one of the reasons that I get frightened.
9:15, the backfire is working. The flames are being sucked away from the house, away from the neighborhood.
Looks good to me. They've got that all cleared. They got a little flare up there, but they've got this across here, but it seems to be going up the hill nicely, so it's staying away from the house.
9:30, 6.5 hours after the first warning, the crisis is over.
They did it just at the right time, and
They really know what they're doing.
I'm impressed.
Finally, at 9:45, down the road from the Fletchers, Patricia Eaton returns to a house still standing, relieved and grateful.
I can't believe it. This is beautiful.
One of the newspaper headlines in Mexico City today said simply, "Oh God." The official statistics, just under 800 people dead, may not begin to tell the story. Take, for example, catastrophe in one building, the Juarez Hospital in Mexico City. We begin with ABC's Tom Shell.
In the most ironic of all the twists of fate in this disaster, the quake inflicted the ultimate punishment on those already suffering. This is all that remains of Mexico City's General Hospital. Rescue workers dig tirelessly, knowing people are alive under all this rubble. A moment of elation. A woman clad only in her hospital gown is found alive. She is lifted into the clear and dies. At the gates, anxious relatives wait for word of other patients. Dr. Jose Velasco is chief of neurosurgery.
We expect that more than 900 deaths are here.
The damage was random, the earthquake allowing age-old buildings to stand and destroying newer ones. The Regis Hotel had 500 guests registered. Most were believed still in their rooms. Just around the corner, a boarding school where rescue workers determined that at least 20 students are alive. The job now is to free them before they suffocate. President Miguel de la Madrid toured hospitals and the heavily damaged sections of the city today. The emergency relief plan he ordered into effect yesterday appears to be working. At the main Red Cross hospital, there is quiet efficiency as supplies of food and medicine pour in from outlying areas. Senora Anna Maria Timmerman is director of Red Cross delegations.
Yesterday was the hardest day because we had more than 400 people coming in here, and it's all under control.
All long-distance telephone service has been cut off in Mexico City, so radio and television stations are filling in. Earthquake survivors call in. The stations broadcast word that they are okay, hoping relatives in distant areas will hear.
Para La Paz, Baja California, familia Gardea Ojeda.
With each hour, the scope of the disaster widens. Damaged buildings collapse, and the number of known dead and injured rises. Tom Shell, ABC News, Mexico City.
These are some of the survivors of the earthquake. Infants rescued shortly after Mexico's General Hospital collapsed, just hours after they were born. For now, they are orphans. No one knows what happened to their mothers. More than 1,500 bodies have been recovered, but rescue workers continue digging through the ruins, convinced that there's still life amid the rubble.
Se metió la Cruz Roja.
We can still hear moaning under the debris, this man told us. We hear people moving around. American officials believe as many as 10,000 bodies, perhaps twice that many, are still buried beneath the rubble. These people have been waiting for 3 days now. They are mothers and fathers searching for their teenagers, 30 of them buried under a school. How many days will they make us wait, this woman is asking. We want to know if our sons and daughters are dead or alive.
At this hour in Mexico City, the search continues for people who may be trapped under concrete and steel. The hope is real. This afternoon, workers rescued a nurse buried since last Thursday in the rubble of her hospital. And tonight, ABC News correspondent Judd Rose joins us with a dramatic account. It's the pictures and emotion of one 24-hour period, a minute-by-minute account of a few people desperately searching for their loved ones.
Midnight in Mexico City. A harvest moon rose overhead, lighting up the sky and shining down over hell on earth. As Sunday became Monday, almost 90 hours had passed since the earthquake that turned Benito Juarez Hospital into a tomb. And it was almost 30 hours since French rescue workers heard some faint sounds. They knew there was still someone in there, someone alive. 600 people, maybe more, had been inside when this 9-story hospital became a 100-foot pile of rubble. One of them, a young medical student, had survived 5 days in an air pocket. To get him out now would be perhaps the most complex and delicate operation ever performed here. To tunnel through tons of concrete and metal rods, all poised to shift and tumble again. Men passed wreckage hand to hand like some ghostly bucket brigade. 2:45, tunneling inside the ruins, rescue workers are blocked by a body. Time is short and they do what they have to. They get a power saw and cut the corpse in two, and they move on.
Sube encima, sube encima. Sube encima, José. Sube encima. Ya está, sube. Muy bien.
5:25, and Juan Jose Hernandez Cruz finally crawls the last few feet to freedom. He's made it to Monday, the day after his 23rd birthday, and now it's dawn. First light comes about 6:45 at the intersection of Chola and Castilla Streets, and we watch a German team search what's left of a 9-story apartment building. Guiding them through the rubble, dogs specially trained to sniff out the scent of a human, dead or alive.
The dogs seem to have found about 10 to 11 places where there are some people. We cannot decide up to now if they are living or not, but there might be some traces of living people around here.
David Lopez listens closely to what the doctor says. Somewhere under these tons of concrete is his third-floor apartment. Inside it are his wife and daughters. One is 3, the other 2. There are no signs of life here, but earlier he found his dog alive, so maybe, just maybe. Searchers sprinkle chalk in places that the dogs have pinpointed. It's 8 in the morning, and soon they'll start to dig. Like many other big earthquakes, in this one, the difference between life and death, survival and disaster, was a fine line and one that didn't seem to make any particular sense. Nowhere in Mexico City did you understand that better than here at an apartment complex called Tlatelolco. Among a forest of high-rise buildings, only one, that one, collapsed onto itself when the earth shook. At 9:10, the air is foul with dust and the stink of bodies rotting in the rubble. We wear masks, everyone does, to keep out the smell and the dust and the disease. There are perhaps 1,200 people crushed in what was a 13-story tower. Incredibly, some are still alive. Are there more people alive in there, she asks. Yes, he says, 4, maybe more. God only knows. He is Placido Domingo, the opera star. Born in Spain, raised in Mexico, Domingo has flown here to find his uncle, his aunt, and 2 cousins who lived in this building.
We have hope because right now they are finding people still alive. This is a tragedy that you hear about, but you don't realize until you are there, and much worse.
But now it's 10:30 Monday, and for many, all hope is gone. We watch them come in a steady stream to this makeshift morgue. Mothers looking for sons, wives looking for husbands, and brothers seeking sisters. They walk among the dead to try and find a familiar face. What we're hunting for is not here, she says, but even those who don't find someone break down.
I am feeling strong, but it's very hard. We are never see too many people die in my country. And it's too hard.
We can show you the grief and the horror, but how can we tell you what it smelled like? The sour smell of death, the acid smell of disinfectant. They sprayed it on the bodies and covered them with ice because by now they were beginning to bloat. It had been more than 5 days by Monday at noon. At midday, the funerals began at a cemetery southeast of the city. 2:20 Monday afternoon. They've begun digging at Chola and Castilla. A bulldozer clears the large pieces of debris, and dust whirls into our eyes and our throats. Then the searchers move in to work by hand, and David Lopez joins them. He knows if there's any chance his wife and daughters are still alive, the rubble must be moved slowly, carefully, so they won't be crushed. Despite the scope of the disaster, much of Mexico City was untouched. And after 5 days, stores began to reopen. People went back to work, and traffic slowed to a snarl. In other words, it was business as usual in a city that, as of Monday, had more than 4,000 dead, more than 8,000 injured, and more than 2,000 missing. And perhaps 350,000 homeless. They filled the streets of the Mexican capital. If you drove anywhere in town on this day, you'd see them looking for a place to stay. At 3, it was hot and dusty. People were thirsty. 1/5 of the 18 million who live here were still without clean water, so they lined up for that. Getting water was easier than other relief.
0042.
At 4:10, Placido Domingo was on a car phone. Regular phone service was still unreliable. And he was using his celebrity status to request supplies for rescue workers at Tlatelolco. He wanted stretchers and emergency lamps and goggles and boots. Domingo talked on. Even in tragedy, he was playing to a capacity crowd. Across the street, they'd found one more survivor, but by 5 o'clock, all we could see and all we could smell coming out of the ruins was death. 6 o'clock at a city that had been living on borrowed time was finally running out of it. When we got back to Chola and Castilla, there were 4 or maybe 5 times as many men tearing through the wreckage of the apartment building. We talked to a man whose 2 children were crushed inside there. Martin Ortega had been outside for more than 90 hours.
I don't even have any strength left to talk to you about all this, because I'm only thinking about my children. I can't sleep for one reason only, thinking that if I shut my eyes for a moment, I can still see my children, and so I can't close my eyes, because I can't see my children the way I should. Instead, I see them crushed into pieces, suffering, who knows, all the things that can happen to them.
David Lopez had by now also been here for 90 hours or more, but at dusk, his ordeal was ending. They found his wife and his children huddled nearby. It was Monday. It was 6:30. But the drama of this day wasn't over yet. At about 8:30 in the evening, search teams here at Juarez Hospital said they heard noises from somewhere inside the wreckage. Noises, they said, indicated to them that there were still people alive somewhere in there. From the stillness, there they were again, human sounds. The searchers tunneled in and found steel bars. They sawed through the bars of a maternity ward crib, and at 11:15, a newborn baby girl was carefully wrapped in a thermal blanket and carried to the ground.
It's okay, the baby is okay.
The baby was okay, cut and bruised, but she was well enough to yawn. They called her Baby Soriano. She didn't have a first name yet. She'd only been born the night before the quake. It had been a place for healing. Now it was home to misery and suffering and death. But at least one more time, a life had been saved at Juarez Hospital. She would be one of the last. It was midnight. A life was beginning, a day was ending, and Mexico's agony went on.
Good evening. There has been a disaster of monumental proportions in Colombia. A volcano there has erupted, and the figures alone are a staggering reflection of how bad it has been. Rescue workers there tonight say that 20,000 people are feared to be dead. 4,000 bodies have already been recovered, and another 25,000 people are missing. ABC's Mark Potter is there to tell a story of what happened when a volcano blew its top.
They have found a girl buried in the rubble, and she is still alive. The recovery of the survivors and the many victims began after a crashing wall of mud destroyed 4 towns with 70,000 residents. The eruption began late last night and shot flames and ash 26,000 feet into the air, the heat melting the volcano's ice cap, causing flooding and mudslides. Rescue workers say one town, Almero, Colombia, has all but disappeared. Rescuers are evacuating 40 to 60,000 people as the volcano continues to erupt. In many cases, though, they arrived too late to save lives. Attempts to revive this man failed. The volcano, called Nevado del Ruiz, or the Ruiz Snowcap, began to rumble late last year. But an American geologist who visited the mountain 2 months ago says there should have been more warning of a major eruption.
It is my strong sense that people were made well aware of the hazard.
The rescue is being coordinated by the president and the Colombian military, but soldiers and Red Cross workers are having a hard time reaching the disaster sites, which are 100 miles from Bogota, high in the Andes Mountains. Roads and bridges were washed out. Authorities say some residents were able to escape, but they had to leave everything else behind. Mark Potter, ABC News, Bogota, Colombia.
Good evening. The devastation in Colombia looks to be every bit as bad as we thought it was yesterday. The best estimates so far are that between 4 and 20,000 people lost their lives when the volcano blew. It will take many days to be certain. When the volcano exploded, the fire, said one, came down like rain. The red-hot lava melted the mountain's ice cap. That caused an avalanche of water, lava, and mud. And as our chief correspondent Richard Threlkeld reports from Colombia, it totally changed the landscape.
Before it awoke this fall, Del Nevado del Ruiz had slept for 400 years while Spaniards conquered the Indians and Simón Bolívar conquered the Spaniards, and Armero became a lovely little valley town of cotton and campesinos and churches. Wednesday night, the volcano awoke and did what volcanoes do, changed the face of the earth. The glacier atop it melted and turned the Rio Lagunilla into a torrent of water and mud. And this is what happened to lovely little Armero and its valley.
The volcano up there behind the clouds was just doing its natural business, changing things. The trouble was, this little valley and the people in it, this little piece of civilization, just got in the way.
In the churchyard at Guayabal down the road, they were coping, disposing of friends and family as best they could. The mortuary was outdoors. The survivors moved among the dead, praying they wouldn't recognize anybody. Over in the park, the helicopters came and went, rushing those who'd lived through it barely to hospitals. There aren't nearly enough hospitals or helicopters, so the U.S. is now sending medical supplies and air rescue equipment down here. Along the roads, thick now with volcanic dust, the people simply stand and watch. They don't seem frightened enough to flee. They're just stunned and wondering what next. There are still people trapped, she says. We need help. In Bogota, the capital today, they were frantically trying to take care of that, collecting relief supplies for thousands of families whose homes and future are lost somewhere beneath a giant mud flat. But those people at least have each other. So many of the victims plucked from the mud now have nobody.
We have many cases in the hospital, like babies and children, and they say, where are my father, where's my mother, I have no family, I'm alone.
In the little hospital San Jose at Mariquita, they're caring for some children who don't know where their mama and papa are or know they're dead. In this valley, family is everything, and now they have none.
He has 7 brothers, and father and the mother. All died.
The volcano has done something terrible to this place, these people, and yet, at the hospital San Jose today, in the middle of everything, a baby was born. Things change. Life goes on. Richard Threlkel, ABC News, Mariquita, Colombia.
We begin tonight with what they are calling the 100-year storm. That is to say, Hurricane Gilbert, which is thrashing its way through the Caribbean, is one of the real killers. Half a dozen people dead in the Dominican Republic, as many as 30 dead on the island of Jamaica. As Gilbert swept across the defenseless Cayman Islands, the winds were 160 miles an hour. At the National Hurricane Center, Gilbert is now classified Force 5. That is to say, a hurricane capable of doing catastrophic damage. ABC's Mark Potter has just been able to file this report from Jamaica.
Even though the worst of the storm has passed now, there is still flooding throughout Jamaica. In Kingston, the capital city, roads look like rivers as rains continue to fall. Thousands of homes and shops are destroyed or badly damaged. Cleanup efforts are already underway as residents try to rebuild roofs torn apart by the winds and walls toppled by falling trees. Even before the storm, Jamaica had a serious housing shortage. Now, with so many homes destroyed by the wind and water, the situation is critical. Where are you going to live tonight?
I don't know. I just don't know.
Electrical power is also out, and there is a shortage of clean drinking water and food.
No, we don't have any food. I don't have any food.
No food. The shops run right out.
Hurricane Gilbert slammed into Jamaica late Monday morning. The pounding waves and the heavy winds quickly took their tolls. Many residents were stuck on the streets and tried to fend off the winds as best they could. Scores were injured and were taken to local hospitals. Most of them were cut by flying roofing tin or crushed under falling walls.
This is an emergency warning. All residents immediately evacuate the area.
The children coming first, come!
Much of Jamaica's coastal area was evacuated. Officials feared waves of 8 to 20 feet above normal, and there was a steady procession of trucks, buses, and cars heading for higher ground. The Jamaican Defense Force was ordered to help in the evacuations and spent much of the day bringing residents to shelters. Many sought refuge after their homes were destroyed.
The tree, the mango limb, broke down, and it went on the roof and broke the roof down, and then the water started coming in.
For about an hour in the afternoon, Jamaica got a break from the hurricane as the calm eye of the storm passed over the island. But soon the winds were raging again, this time worse than before. At the University Hospital in Kingston, walls and windows broke apart. Entire floors were soaked and patients had to be moved to safety.
Most of our wards are damaged. What is not damaged from windows blowing in is flooded.
Although residents were warned to prepare for the storm and to take shelter, many did not and were horrified by its power. Hurricane Gilbert is now being called the worst natural disaster in Jamaica's modern history. Mark Potter, ABC News, Kingston, Jamaica.
Good evening. Hurricane Gilbert has come ashore, and along the Gulf Coast in both Texas and Mexico, there's a small sigh of relief. The hurricane has come ashore, but the center of the storm, where the winds and the rain are at their most vicious, has pounded across the coastline in a largely unpopulated part of Mexico, about 120 miles south of Brownsville, Texas, which is right on the border. And so Brownsville is spared, although bruised. ABC's Al Dale is there.
As Hurricane Gilbert crept toward shore, wind gusts of 60 to 70 miles an hour whipped the Brownsville area, hurling angry waves into seawalls. All day long, sheets of rain fell, causing local streets to flood. Just across the border in Matamoros, Mexico, even more flooding, stranding those who waited too long to go to evacuation shelters. In and around Brownsville, several tornadoes spawned by the hurricane caused minor damage. In Port Isabel, floating docks bobbed up and down in the churning swells as the wind made getting around difficult even for seagulls. Several miles inland, evacuation shelters took in thousands of residents running from the powerful storm.
We can help each other out, and so we can all pull through.
The National Guard is on alert just in case its help is needed as Hurricane Gilbert makes landfall and weather conditions intensify. Long gasoline lines reflect the fear and uncertainty many here feel as they brace for Gilbert's worst. But this gas station manager decided to close early and called on police to help discourage insistent customers.
Well, we need to send our people home. That's the most important. We want to close down, shut down, get them home with their families.
Safety.
Right.
Some residents just got around to boarding up their homes and getting out, while someone else got away too soon, leaving the dog behind.
Hurricane Gilbert is history tonight, dying down to a mere tropical depression over the mountains of northern Mexico, and this is what it looks like tonight. After a week-long 2,500-mile rampage, at least 130 people are dead, hundreds of thousands are homeless, and property damage is estimated in the billions. In perhaps a final tragic chapter, there are fears tonight in the Mexican city of Monterrey that as many as 200 more people may have died in floodwaters from the hurricane. Our coverage begins in Mexico with Gary Shepard.
It was the worst single disaster of the entire hurricane. The 4 busloads of Mexicans were approaching the industrial city of Monterrey, 110 miles south of the Texas border. As the buses moved along a low-lying stretch of highway, they were overturned and swept into the Santa Catarina River by raging floodwaters caused by torrential downpours. 4 police officers who had attempted to rescue the passengers were also swept to their deaths by the powerful river. And 2 rescue workers operating this tractor trying to pull the buses out of the water also perished. The body of one is still trapped in the tractor wreckage. Authorities say 32 bodies have already been recovered, 20 in Monterrey itself, not far from the scene of the disaster, a dozen others downstream. The Red Cross says only 13 of the bus passengers survived. Police say the storm has caused serious flooding in northeast Mexico and more than 30,000 people are homeless. A number of bridges were torn away by the surging waters and some roads leading in and out of Monterrey have been washed out. Gary Shepard, ABC News, Mexico City.
This is Ron Claiborne in Mexico. It was here in northeast Mexico that Hurricane Gilbert struck with all of its fury. These people fled the tiny coastal towns of Laguna and Carbonera, smack in the path of some of Gilbert's most destructive power. They say at least 3 people there were killed. Everything was destroyed. No houses, nothing left. In San Fernando, the area's largest city, the hurricane twisted and toppled telephone and power lines. The roofs and walls of many houses and businesses were torn away by the high winds. Around 9 or 10 o'clock, you could start to hear the winds of the hurricane coming. In some areas, water service was disrupted. Many streets and fields were underwater. In the border town of Matamoros, hundreds of people sought shelter in railroad boxcars opened by the government. Yet miraculously, it seemed, much of Mexico was unscathed. As bad as Gilbert was, it could have been a lot worse. The Western Hemisphere's most powerful hurricane on record ended up bypassing the major coastal population centers on both sides of the border. With Gilbert now history, all that remains is the mopping up and the patient wait for the floodwaters to recede. Ron Claiborne, ABC News, Matamoros, Mexico.
While Hurricane Gilbert never made a direct hit on any major cities in Mexico or the U.S., it nevertheless battered many small villages along the Mexican coast. ABC's Ron Claiborne paid a visit to some of those small towns today as the villagers returned to their homes for the first time since the hurricane struck.
Early this morning, the refugees from Hurricane Gilbert headed home, 3 days after fleeing their coastal villages for the relative safety of the inland city of San Fernando, 30 miles away. At the coast, the scene was one of devastation. At La Hugo Sanchez's small wooden shack, virtually nothing was left standing. We lost almost everything we had. Everything we lost went that way. A house over there got lost too. All that could be salvaged were some planks, shreds of clothing, a few tools. The powerful eye of Hurricane Gilbert came ashore here along the northeast coast of Mexico, lined with tiny fishing villages, and it was here that it did its worst damage. Several miles down the road, the destruction was even worse. Many of the ramshackle houses had been reduced to splinters. Fields were now shallow lakes. People's personal effects were torn to shreds and were now draped across the landscape. When the Gonzalez family reached their village, it looked as though nothing had been spared the hurricane's fury. But their home and the shed where they store their fishing equipment were practically undamaged. Their neighbors discovered that their simple wooden shanties had also survived. In the midst of so much destruction, these homes had somehow made it through. They had been saved, said this woman, by the grace of God.
Gracias, Cristo, Cristo.